Welcome to another episode of Daybreak, the podcast. You see, the primary objective of legislation is to prevent crime from happening, and not the punishment of a criminal. A preventive law is what a society needs to guide it through the maze of rights and responsibilities and set the boundaries clearly, defining the consequences of trespassing. The Canadian law considers each citizen to be equal in rights and responsibilities. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the basic document that protects fundamental rights in Canada. It is part of a Constitutional Act, 1982, which means it has the highest legal authority and any and all law must comply with it. The Charter defines the basic rights and freedoms that all levels of government must respect, including but not limited to the freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And the elephant in the room today is freedom of religion. And the question, if it is absolute or conditional, in context of the Bill C-9 or Combating Hate Act. So stay with me as I will be right back. Welcome back to Daybreak, the podcast where we are discussing today the Bill C-9 or Combating Hate Act and testing it to see if it aligns within the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms or if it contradicts any of the provisions of the Charter. You have heard the opposition claiming that the bill denies Canadians the rights and freedoms guaranteed in the Charter, and you have heard the government claiming that the Bill C-9, as the name suggests, will combat the hate crimes, especially based on religious text, and hence will help fight the Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in Canada. So let's first see what personal fundamental rights the Charter guarantees for Canadians and how absolute are those rights and freedoms. The Section 2 of the Charter guarantees freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. Section 15 confirms that everyone is equal before and under the law and guarantees protection against discrimination based on race, religion, gender, age, disability, and so on. But Section 1 of the Charter sets the limits of the individual rights and freedoms, saying that the rights are guaranteed subject to reasonable limits, prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Meaning, the rights are not absolute, and the government can limit rights if it can justify it. Let me now jump to the Bill C-9 itself and see what it attempts to achieve, and especially talk about the part of the bill which is the most controversial. The proponents claim that the Bill C-9 was introduced to strengthen Canada's legal framework against hate speech and hate crime, especially in the online environment. So it focuses more directly on hate propaganda, online hate content, and preventive measures for violence. This bill expands definition of the hate propaganda, addresses online dissemination more explicitly, and introduces stronger penalties in some cases. One of the most debated parts is that a person could be brought before a judge if there were a reasonable ground to fear that they may commit a hate crime, and a judge could impose conditions such as restrictions on internet use, no contact orders, and monitoring conditions. The opposition, however, does not agree and claims that the bill poses a risk to freedom of expression, and they object the preemptive nature of the bill by claiming that the fear that someone may commit a crime is too broad a standard and there is potential for overreach or misuse. They also show concern about the subjective definition of hate. So basically, the difference of opinion lies in the opposition claiming an infringement of individual freedoms guaranteed by the Charter, and the government advocating for its responsibility to ensure public safety and social order. So let's deconstruct the controversy to study the elements. The first objection is that the Charter grants freedom of expression, and this bill, however, claiming that it restricts hate, in fact restricts the freedom of expression. So where is the line between the hate and freedom when it comes to expressing oneself? But who decides those limits? Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already said, and are you ready for this? The hate speech is a protected expression in Canada, but it can be limited. Let us discuss the case in point to understand the freedom of hate speech. The case of James Keekstra, a high school teacher in Alberta who taught students that Jews were evil and part of conspiracies, and he was charged under the Criminal Code hate propaganda law in 1990. The Supreme Court ruled that even hateful speech was a protected expression in Canada, but government could restrict it as well. Because when hate speech dehumanizes groups and undermines equality and social harmony, it can lead to discrimination and potential violence. So Canada allows certain limits on speech that is extreme, targets identifiable groups, and incites real social harm. Our Charter allows laws preventing extreme hate, clear harms to groups, and narrow definitions. But what is not allowed is the law against offensive opinion, religious or political views, and vague or subjective harmful speech. Canadian Charter will protect free speech, even ugly speech, but not speech that dehumanizes identifiable groups of people or individuals to the point of harming them. Let us look at another element in this discussion, and that is the freedom of religion. Pierre Poilievre expressed religious freedom concerns about this bill, claiming that the bill could penalize people for expressing religious beliefs, especially beliefs about sexual ethics, gender identity, and morality rooted in scriptures. In simple words, someone quoting or preaching from religious texts could be accused of hate speech. He claims that the section of the Charter guaranteeing freedom of religion protects holding religious beliefs and expressing them publicly, and covers preaching, religious teaching, and public advocacy now. Now, Canada is a multicultural democracy that wants to protect groups from harm. And Canada is a liberal democracy as well that wants to protect beliefs and expressions. But sometimes the religious doctrine directly conflicts with the modern equality norms. The classical example of hate speech would be a statement like, "These people are evil and should be removed from our communities. They are destroying our nation." This is a classical example of hate speech, as it encourages exclusion and social hostility and is exactly the kind of behavior that Bill C-9 intends to prevent. Now, Canada is a secular country and guarantees religious freedom, but it guarantees the religious freedom for all religions and on equal level. And freedom for all is only possible when the boundaries of that freedom are clearly defined and understood by all. You cannot protect something that cannot be defined, as it will be a vague concept of a freedom and not real freedom. The real freedom can only be guaranteed when you can, 1, define what it is, and 2, establish and define its boundaries. Because you cannot accuse someone of crossing a boundary that is not defined. The secular nature of our country also requires that we need to keep the religion out of the parliament and off our streets, and keep our politics out of the places of worship. Stop political outsourcing, because the moment you identify a group of citizens with a religious label and start looking for their bulk representation, you have outsourced the politics and branded its citizens. You have gone Costco for the sake of a better understanding of dealing wholesale with your constituents. You are not talking to the citizens anymore that you were chosen to represent. And the moment A politician enters a place of worship to deliver the political message. He strengthens the religious identity and separates them from the mainstream Canadian citizenship. And when politicians enter places of worship, the religion enters the parliament from back door. The places of worship are no place for a politician, and the parliament is no place for a religion either. It is a dangerous game, and I see Canadian politicians playing it every day. Religion is not a national matter. It is a personal matter, and politicians have no jurisdiction over that. And I say that without ambiguity, that in their nature, every religion has had a history of hating the other religions. Religions and faith are two entirely different things. The faith is a set of beliefs, and the religions are the politics of the faith. And politics of the faith do not mix well with politics of the country. And mixing politics of faith with politics of the country can only result in destruction of the secular fabric of our country. God and scriptures belong in your heart and in your places of worship, not in Canadian streets or in Canadian Parliament. Scriptures are full of verses that, if used inappropriately and out of context, would constitute hate speech today. But we do not apply presentism to these scriptures, and we read verses in their historical context. It's okay when you use those verses for your Friday, Saturday, or Sunday sermon, inside your home or inside your places of worship, or recite them in your prayers, but it's not okay when you bring these verses out on the Canadian streets as you are creating an atmosphere of hate that may lead to violence. And that is exactly what Bill C-9 intends to prevent. It is not against the verses, Pierre, and it is not against the freedom of expression or freedom of religion. It's against the violence. And once again, I'm forced to say that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Canadians do not want to repeat that history, Pierre. Canada is strong because Canada uses the strength in its diversity to its advantage. When politicians start highlighting the diversity as the difference between Canadians, religion, ethnic, racial, or whatever kind, instead of highlighting the common grounds between them, the strength disappears. And the same diversity weakens our Canada. Your freedom is guaranteed as long as there is a charter, and Canada is strong enough to defend and enforce it. It brings all Canadians together and binds them in an unbreakable bond. Any kind of extremism, including hate speech, weakens that bond as it dilutes the very bonding elements. Your rights are yours to have and to keep, but apply the same principle to others too. The right and responsibilities granted by the scriptures and rules determined in the scriptures are enforced by God alone. But rights granted by Canadian Charter are enforced by Canadian justice system. Bill C-9 does not restrict your personal morality. It restricts your application of your personal morality on others. And it ensures that every Canadian can live with their own personal morality without fear and without being target of hate. Every Canadian is free to make personal, moral, and lifestyle choices, and knows that there is a charter of rights and freedoms in Canada that establishing them, and that there is a law that protects them. When we talk about scriptures, keep the scriptures for your faith and your morals, and I must say that let God deal with sins and law deal with the crime. And it is time we saw the difference and appreciated it. This is the time for clarity. This is daybreak time. Thank you.